We're joined on the line by Lindsey Burke, director of the Center for Education Policy at the Heritage Foundation. Lindsey, thanks so much for joining the show. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So we are watching as Andrew Cuomo idiotically allows Bill de Blasio to idiotically shut down the New York City school system. It doesn't matter that the apparent positivity rate in testing in the New York City school system is 0.23%, which is way, way lower than whatever threshold for positivity de Blasio had declared for shutting down various industries. So you got restaurants open until 10 p.m. and bars open until 10 p.m., but none of the schools open. What does the evidence show about keeping schools open in a time of a COVID pandemic?
Yeah, so thankfully, schools don't appear to be major sources of outbreaks, and children really appear quite resilient, thankfully, to the virus. And the reality is that private schools have recognized this. Many schools across the country are open and open safely. And you're right, the test positivity rate for schools in New York City is well below 1%. And yet they have closed down the largest school district in the country, 1.1 million students, 1,800 schools. This is unfair to parents. It's unfair to children to close schools, to reopen them, to close them again, and really giving parents zero notice, not to mention a ton of whiplash.
So, Lindsey, I've been scouring the internet for any evidence at all that a single teacher in the United States has died as a result of obtaining COVID from a student. And I've yet to identify a single case of this happening. And we've had 250,000 people die in the United States. In fact, every media case that I'm aware of that says that a teacher died says the teacher obtained it from either another teacher or from somebody else outside of school. I don't understand the rationale here. But teachers' unions are suggesting that teachers are in dire danger. We've seen teachers protesting by sending their will and testament to governors, asking for the schools to be shut down and doing protests with coffins. Are teachers in dire danger of COVID-19?
Look, the unions, you're right, they are acting in bad faith. And we have seen this over and over and over again. It's not just in New York City. It's in places like Washington, D.C., where I am right now, where the unions at the 11th hour several times now have tried to reach a contract agreement and then pulled out of that contract agreement. You look at unions in Los Angeles, for example, saying that they would not bless school reopening unless a long list of liberal demands were met, like defunding the police and Medicare for all and closing down charter schools, that, all of their demands that have nothing to do with this question of the safety of school reopening. And so they continue to act in bad faith. They are, with these decisions, hurting children, not only across New York City, but across the country in these large cities where schools are closed to in-person instruction. And look, that includes kids with special needs, children from low-income families, children who are homeless. You can look at New York City right now, just 26% of eighth graders can read proficiently. And that's pre-pandemic. So what does this look like moving forward for these kids? It doesn't look good, unfortunately. And the unions really are to blame for a lot of what we're seeing in the states right now.
And so we're speaking with Lindsey Burke, Center for Education Policy at Heritage Foundation. So, Lindsey, what does it say more broadly about teachers' unions? I've been arguing for a long time that it is fairly obvious the teachers' unions, who claim that they're acting on behalf of both teachers and students, have no interest in students or parents at all, that they are basically out there, just like any other union, to protect their members, which to them means making a buck for the teachers at the expense of taxpayers, and in this case, at the expense of students. What does it say about teachers' unions generally? Should they even be legal, given the fact that they are negotiating not against private entities, but against the taxpayer and against student interests?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, these are public sector unions, and it has been a huge problem for K-12 education for decades and decades now. And you're right, they represent the interests of their members who are not only teachers, but a lot of non-teaching staff members across the country. We have seen tremendous increases in non-teaching staff bloat over the past 50 years. We're at a point now, if you go back to 1950, there were 2.36 teachers for every non-teacher in a school district. Today, it's 1-to-1. And so that means that for every teacher that you see in a classroom, there is a non-teaching administrative counterpart. And of course, that reflects union policy over the past few decades to grow their numbers and to really become incredibly powerful blockers of reform. And look, during the pandemic, we've seen just how powerful these unions remain, their ability to force big school districts to close down on a whim. I mean, they're there were reports from parents who are livid in New York City and deeply, deeply frustrated. We saw one parent yesterday say he was boiling mad with the union, with Cuomo, with de Blasio, and said he had reached his setup point a week ago and decided to enroll his child in a Catholic school. So, I suppose the silver lining here is that unions might be overstepping a bit. We're actually seeing a pretty considerable exit from a lot of these schools. And hopefully moving forward in the future, we can think about ways to actually fund families rather than school districts so they're not at the whim of these unions and big government policies moving forward.
We're speaking with Lindsey Burke, director for the Center for Education Policy at Heritage Foundation. Joe Biden, the election has not yet been certified. If Joe Biden enters office in January, some of the names that have been put up there as possibilities for his education secretary include Randy Weingarten, president of the American Federation of Teachers. What would it mean for education in the United States for the head of the nation's largest teachers union to be the head of the Department of Education?
Yeah, look, this would be 180 degrees difference from where we currently are. With Secretary DeVos, we have a Secretary of Education who recognizes the reality that public education means funding the public and that we should be agnostic about what type of school that education takes place in. This has been a secretary who is in favor of funding students and families directly rather than government-run school systems. And to have the prospect hanging out there of the head of one of the nation's largest teachers unions, we know exactly what that's going to look like moving forward. It's going to mean a continuation of a spending spree on K-12 and higher education. It's going to mean growth in federal involvement in K-12 education, which has been an utter failure for the past half century. And it's going to mean policies that empower unions and the adults in the system, unfortunately, at the expense of choices for families and students.
Well, that is Lindsey Burke, director at the Center for Education Policy at the Heritage Foundation. Really appreciate your time and your insight.
Thank you for having me.